Right, so while you're getting your questions going, I wanted to start off with a question that I have so far. And this, I believe, might be for Miss Natalie Ivy. As a responsible member of a team, if I have an inkling of impropriety, conducting a mini investigation on behalf of HR is acceptable.
Well, if we define impropriety, I think we need to get a little bit better understanding. It's one thing if it is I believe my coworker took the stapler off my desk and didn't put it back. Perhaps you might want to launch your own investigation. But if it is impropriety where it may be a violation of policy, then I would not recommend that. And that would need to be involving your HR department.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So we appreciate your good effort, but let that be your guide. All right. Next question. This is for Mr. Rubin. Can I take FMLA to care for my daughter who has just had a C-section?
To take care of who?
My daughter.
Oh,
She
your
just
daughter.
This is my first grandbaby.
Oh.
You know, and my daughter had a C-section, and I really
Did
want
we
to
had
be
this
there.
question at the session?
We sure did.
Typically, no, because it's for self or your spouse or your underage. So the exception would be if they're under 18, or if you're still like the custodian and they're not able to take care of themselves or self-care, then yes, you can. But that would be the only exception.
Thank you so much. Give me just one moment. Okay. Oh, this is a good question. This might be for Jasmine. Does today's training count for CEUs for Florida Conference pastors? So the answer is yes. Give us hard questions, but I like that question too. All right, let me refresh this. It seems I need to refresh it to see the new questions. Okay. This one says, I have a question about documenting conflicting conversations. How would you have it so that it doesn't continue to be a never-ending back and forth email when the other person may disagree? Should the content of the email be discussed in verbal and get to agree there in understanding? Let's read that again. I have a question about documenting conflicting conversations. How do you have it so that it doesn't continue to be a never-ending back and forth email when the other person may disagree? Should the content of the email be discussed and get to agree?
Is it a live conversation, or because it's a little confusing to me?
Yeah, me too.
The question goes from conversation, which, I can sit here. I can have a conversation with Stephanie, or we could email each other. To me, that's two different things. So what are we talking about? Are we talking about a chain of emails or a conversation or both?
Yeah, that's a fair question. So if you'd like to if this is your question, if you'd like to text maybe more clarification, I'd be happy to re-ask that for you. This question says, Natalie, what would you say to a situation where I want diversity on my team, so I'd look for a woman to balance out my team, even if I interviewed a man who was qualified?
Yes. So if you remember from my keynote this morning, I had a leader who decided that she just wanted to balance out the team because the group dynamics she felt were better by having both a male and not adding another strong female onto the team. So she had, as she said, also, by the way, she called it the hen house. She didn't want all the women in the hen house. At the end of the day, we have to make sure that we're clear on what the job description needs, what are the key qualifications, and find out who is the best match for the position and not allow the gender issue or any protected characteristic to get in the way of that.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, this one says, and this is for any of us, I suppose, any of you. Is there a time frame recommendation in addressing insubordination?
The sooner the better. You shouldn't let, for any disciplinary issue, and you and I have just met, so we haven't talked about this. You and I have just met, so, and Ruben and I know each other, but I don't think you should let a lot of grass grow under your feet with the disciplinary issue. I think if you want to wait until you stick your head in an ice bucket to cool off, that's one thing. But letting a lot of time pass, first of all, if you don't document properly, your memory gets a little bit scrambled. And the second thing is you should deal with these things quickly because, what you reward, you get more of. And if you don't want people to be insubordinate, so deal with it quickly. And I'm not talking about, the French Revolution with the guillotine necessarily, but you should address it, I won't say immediately, but within a fairly short period of time after it's happened.
Absolutely. Thank you. Can you give examples of side hustles and conflict of interest, either directors, administrators, pastors, chaplains, principals? What are some examples of what a side hustle or conflict of interest may be?
Okay, I guess that's for me. I'll give you a real life example, not in the Florida conference or the Southeastern conference, but in another conference somewhere. There was a long ago and far away in a conference long, far, far away. No. This is, there was a pastor who was a full-time gospel minister, and he's also serving as a prosecutor in one of the local counties in the state where he resides. Now, I've never been a pastor. I've never been a prosecutor, but I've known a lot of prosecutors, and prosecutor's job is a job and a half just by itself. Add a pastor to that. So what's the side hustle? The prosecutor gig or the pastor gig? They're both full-time jobs. So I don't know, if the policy, the conflict policy within the not the health systems, but the church side of it, says that you need to you need to refrain from anything, not just side hustles, but anything that interferes with your full commitment to the job. That can be involvement in a political campaign. That can be involvement with I use the homeowners association board seat. Not that all of you are too smart to take that on, right? But yeah, anything. But a side hustle is essentially another job, but it is, on the conflict policy, it's forbidden to the degree that it interferes with your full commitment to teaching, ministry, whatever your position is.
Thank you. Dr. Howard, you look too comfortable. I do have a question for you. So what's the difference between meeting your basic needs and self-care?
Good question. The difference between meeting your basic needs and self-care, I would say there's quite a bit of overlap with that. My vulnerability or tendency would be when it comes to knowing what's enough to take care of yourself. Part of what I talked about in my breakout was how much rest do you need to keep your passion and engage your life fully. And so that would be the metric I would use. I mean, most people, certainly in roles like yours, their vulnerability is not to be lazy or indulgent, it's to over-sacrifice. And so to get a feel for it in your heart, like what is it I sense from the Lord about this? But then I think it's always good to talk to your spouse, a close friend, like to get a sense from them. Does this feel like too much or the right amount? I would encourage both those to have a better sense, because it's going to be depending on your particular situation. But those would be my two recommendations.
Awesome, thank you. For Stephanie, can someone work part-time for the conference and then have their own consulting company where they do a similar job as a contractor? Is that allowed?
The answer is probably no, because they're probably, if they're doing something similar as a consultant that they're doing for you as an employee, it's probably the work that they're doing as a consultant is an extension of their employment duties. Mm-hmm. And this situation does come up from time to time. And so I generally would discourage entering into contracts with your own employees. it also creates conflict situations, as well as a question of whether they're actually an independent contractor in that role or not.
Thank you. One of my gentleman friends here in the far left of me, please let me know whether Florida Conference gives Sabbath leaves to workers. If yes, let me know how it works and who qualifies. I'll repeat the question. I believe it's probably sabbatical. Please let me know if, let's say sabbatical. Please let me know whether Florida Conference gives sabbatical to workers. If yes, let me know how it works and who qualifies. That's really Jasmine.
Yeah.
We do have a sabbatical policy for administrators at the office and pastors. And I do believe that recently it's not applying for chaplains. And I'm assuming that administration had communicated that to the chaplains already. But yes, and there is actually a sabbatical request form. You must work 7 years at the Florida Conference and be assigned 2 years in your current job to be eligible. And of course, you need to discuss it with your supervisor and have a plan on who will be covering while you're out.
Thank you, Jasmine. I want to contribute to your health, but I'll answer this question so you don't have to come up again. As a small school, where can we get templates for volunteer contracts, notice and written consent for background checks, employee handbooks, etc.? So I'm going to switch out employee handbooks and say working policy. That is available through your employee self-service account. So when you get in, on your left column, if you go to company, you'll see the link to working policy, and you have access to that there. By way of the contracts and the background check information, feel free to connect with our team in HR, and we'll be happy to get that for you. All right, next question. Dr. Howard challenged us to take retreats. Will the conference help us as managers and provide a paid retreat once a year to Camp Kalakwa? That's the rest and relaxation policy, correct? I like these questions, whoever you are. Okay, when conducting investigations, do witness statements have to be written and signed?
So that really is, that's really going to be an organization's decision to make. There are some benefits to witnesses signing off on a statement, because later then if their story changes from what was captured, that could be helpful. On the other hand, some organizations choose to simply document the conversations without having an individual sign it. Some choose not to make the process perhaps so formal. So that really is a bit of an organizational decision in terms of your unique procedures. There are organizations that do it both ways. However, I'm sure with members of council here, there are benefits to actually having signed statements.
Thank you. Here's a good question. What about balancing your team racially? Is that legal or okay to do?
What was that? Say that again.
Balancing your team racially. Is that legal or okay to do?
I can answer that. So I do more than classifying employees. I'm a general labor employment lawyer. And so I would say I would not engage in that practice. There's a recent Supreme Court decision called the Muldrow case where to have an adverse action for purposes of demonstrating discrimination, it doesn't have to be you hire or fire or some ultimate employment decision. In that case, the court actually said if simply moving a person, moving their office could amount to an adverse employment action. So in the workplace, we ought not be making decisions, any decisions based on race, gender, or any protected characteristic.
I'm going to make a confession before I read this question. I kind of like the question because it's putting two of my presenters here in the hot seat at the same time with one question. Okay, so it says, in Natalie's presentation, she mentioned being discriminated for being a female, although qualified. But in Ruben's presentation, he said there's no problem with discriminating on the basis of having a diverse team. What is the appropriate approach?
Can you say the last part?
Sure.
Having the what?
So in Natalie's presentation, she mentioned being discriminated against for being female, although qualified. But in Ruben's presentation, he said there is no problem with discriminating on the basis of having a diverse team. So the question is, what is the appropriate approach?
Just to be clear, there's nothing wrong with having a diverse team. In fact, I encourage you to have a diverse team. But if you're going to have a diverse team based on making decisions on race, gender, or any other protected characteristics, then that's not legal. So.
Right, exactly. And in my situation, the leader, Julie, she just simply said, this time I just need to pick the guy. She just wanted to choose a male over me. So she was selecting for the position just based on the protected characteristic, not on my capabilities.
She could have done that without saying.
Perhaps. Perhaps.
Still illegal.
I mean, to help my colleague here, when you're making decisions, you ought to be making decisions based on people's qualifications, their experience, their background, not based on gender or race. Even if you don't say anything, your employees can prove discrimination even without such an explicit statement. So for instance, if you make a decision, a hiring decision, and you hire somebody that's clearly less qualified, and you've done it because they're a female or male, the person can just basically compare their qualifications, and then you have to articulate, well, then why did you hire the person that was a lot less qualified? What is the non-discriminatory reason? And so, you run into that issue. You can prove discrimination in other ways. If you, in the discipline context, you might have a situation where you've been lighter on an employee because of some protected characteristic, and then harsher on an employee because they didn't have that protected characteristic. That could be used as evidence of discrimination.
All right, thank you. So we're back to insubordination. So regarding insubordination or co-employee not doing what they should be doing as it relates to their job expectations, if the direct supervisor refuses to handle it, what's the best next step?
That's certainly a leadership issue, isn't it? Right? That's a leadership issue. That goes back to what we were discussing with respect to accountability. So if you have this continually coming up, then I think that that's probably a conversation with the next level leader and probably your human resources team.
Well, if I could just jump in,
Sure.
you got two problems
Yeah.
here. You got the problem of the insubordinate employee, and then you have the problem of the manager who isn't willing. I was about to say capable, but I don't know that that's true, but isn't willing to address it. And so you really have, and as you move through the organizational structure, at some point, you're going to run into somebody who is willing to deal with it. And that may be HR, that may be your general counsel, that may be outside counsel, that may be a HR consultant, it may be a number of different people, but even, speaking of all of those positions, it really does have to be ultimately somebody in management that, the technical phrase, lowers the boom. Lowers the boom on particularly the manager, because you're going to have people who are insubordinate, and you either correct it or you don't. And it just won't, if you don't correct it, you essentially have an unmanageable employee at that point.
Can I add something? I think the employees need to know and feel comfortable that there's not just like one way to report something. There's got to be more than one designated way of hearing someone out, right? Because if it's your supervisor, but your supervisor is the one that's harassing you, then does that mean it's the end? That's not the end of the road, right? There's other ways. So I think they need to be comfortable knowing that there's more than one person they can go to if there's an issue, and it's not just their supervisor.
Excellent point. Thank you for adding that. Bob, I really, really want to have a second job, it seems like. So this question says, can I be involved in real estate as a pastor?
I'm sorry?
Can I be involved in real estate as a pastor? Can you bring it more closer?
You know, I guess involved in real estate is kind of a broad phrase. You know, the policy on conflict states that anything that interferes with your full commitment to ministry is something that presents a conflict. Now, if I have a condo down in Ocean Pines, Maryland, y'all are laughing because we do have beaches in Maryland. You know, a condo down at Ocean Pines that I have a company that I pay every year to rent it out to vacationing, you know, pilgrims, and all I get is the check. Probably not a problem. Involved in real estate, though, needs a little bit of definition. Because involved in real estate can be very passive and very uninvolved other than getting the check or paying the mortgage if you can't rent the place. A, or B, you're down there every weekend fixing the leaky toilet and the HVAC system. In which case, number two would probably interfere with your commitment to ministry. Number one probably wouldn't, but that's within the discretion of your management. So involved in real estate, you know, I have to get a little more flesh on that skeleton.
Thank you. All right. Does the discrimination policy apply to volunteers? Are we liable if they feel we didn't take them due to age or health disclosures such as being HIV positive?
So volunteers aren't employees, so they're, if you were sued under Title VII, it's only employees that could sue. So this actually goes to my presentation there. You know, there could be potentially some argument that some volunteers are employees, but traditionally, no, they wouldn't be covered by those non-discrimination laws. Unless they could demonstrate that they were an employee.
Can I jump in?
Absolutely.
I think I agree with everything you just said, except check your county ordinances. Why do I say that? Because years ago, I had a case in Montgomery County, the People's Republic of Montgomery County, and there is in their human relations ordinances, it applies, all of the protected categories under Title VII also apply. I was shocked.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be honest with you, my teeth fell out of my head. But this guy was able to have a cause of action in the circuit court, and I couldn't believe it. But now, generally, I think what you said is absolutely correct, but there are these little pockets in the U.S. that expanded into the volunteer realm.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention too, if you have a volunteer that's harassing one of your employees, you have an obligation to stop that behavior, or you could be liable.
Yep.
All right. We're gonna refresh our speakers here because some of these questions are amping up, so they might need to wet their mouth first for answering. How would you recommend encouraging a salaried employee to not overwork if you are concerned that they will burn out? How do you encourage a salaried employee not to overwork if you are concerned that they will burn out?
That's pro bono. Well, that's a great question. So to me, in my breakout, I talked about the importance of leaders ideally modeling godly self-care, not overextending. And so I think it's really important for strong leaders. I'll use that as my modifier. So one of the fellows that I coach in Georgia Cumberland, so he's been really good about taking retreats himself. And so Historically, he would ask them, have you had your retreat scheduled for this quarter? And so, to me, Jesus didn't come to exploit or to use. And so to be invested in your subordinates as in kind of a coaching capacity to help ensure that not only are they saved in terms of their salvific experience, but also are they growing towards wholeness. And so having an eye towards helping your subordinates continue to grow and mature and make time for themselves, I think is just being a good steward. That'd be my fundamental answer.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Bob, I hear what you're saying. Again, I really just want to work multiple jobs. So here's this next question. Can you not be fully committed to 2 jobs? Plenty of hours in a week to work 80 plus hours. That's a real question.
Okay. Here, I'm going to tell a story. All right, here's the story. You have a pastor, and this is all completely hypothetical. He has a district in the Florida Conference. This is very hypothetical. It's real, but the Florida Conference part is hypothetical.
Oh, okay.
All right, and he starts an independent ministry. So I suppose, yes, it is possible, but your employer, the Florida Conference, doesn't have the time or the energy or the expertise to police that. But if a pastor starts, for example, an independent ministry, and I don't want to say Brother Love's Traveling Salvation Show, but he goes out and he says, I'm going to have the Bob Ministry, and Bob's also employed in Florida Conference, and the Bob Ministry starts raking in large amounts of cash. What do you think Bob's going to spend more of his time doing? His district for Florida Conference for his salary, or the independent ministry where he rakes in large amounts of cash? Well, maybe some of you would say, well, I'm just going to split it 50-50 or whatever. I won't say it's impossible, because I think that would be overstating it, but it's very difficult, and your employer is not going to have the time to police this. And then B, if the complaints start coming in from the parishioners, pastor's not showing up to prayer meeting, pastor's not showing up to preach, pastor's this, pastor's that, that's going to be the first thing they anchor on. You got this side hustle. What's going on with that? The low-hanging fruit. What they call Occam's razor. The easiest, the simplest is generally the explanation. Point is that I honestly, I don't think you could be fully committed to two full-time jobs. I don't. But impossible, I'm not going to say that, but I don't think you can be committed to 2 full-time jobs. I really don't. Somebody will probably prove me wrong, but I think that would be the rare exception and not the rule.
I want to add something. Are there people out there that can function on 3 hours of sleep a day? Yeah, maybe. There's very exceptional people out there that can I'm not one of them, but there are some. I think the issue is not up to the employee to decide whether they can do 2 jobs. That's the point here. The employee's responsibility is to disclose that I'm interested in doing this in addition to my job. The employer gets to decide whether that's a conflict or not. So it's really not that hard, because it's not the employee's decision, it's the employer's decision as to whether it's a conflict or not. So they need to disclose it. That's where it starts, is disclosure.
You're right.
All right, thank you. When conducting and documenting an investigation interview, how does making note of and documenting a person's demeanor, etc., maintain objectivity?
Great question. So one of the things in my session this afternoon we talked about were the EEOC has guidelines in walking through assessing credibility, all right? And one of them is, inherent plausibility, how believable is it, and then certainly demeanor. Obviously, you're going to take in a lot of things. You're going to look at the responses to interview questions, Was someone evasive? Did they respond to questions? Were there some they completely just didn't respond to at all? And then you're also going to look at whether they were defensive, but what you don't do is just try to draw straight line conclusions just based on body language either. No, and we also have to look at just cultural references. We have so much diversity, and now it's almost 19% of the U.S. workforce has a national origin other than the United States. And so we have to be very mindful that we just don't draw conclusions. However, does demeanor come into play? Yes, certainly. When you have some individuals that are extremely defensive over just a very simple question, that gives one pause to wonder why that is. But we aren't going to draw just, again, straight line conclusions from just one thing. It's really in an investigative interview and then the culmination of the entire investigation itself. You're going to be collecting a lot of data points, and then certainly at the end, usually talking with another colleague or counsel about some of those things that you've collected, then demeanor can certainly be part of that, but it is certainly not a defining factor just from that interview itself. Okay.
Thank you. Nick, how can I avoid burnout if my work location is understaffed?
How can I avoid burnout if my work location is understaffed? Is that right? You can't. It's impossible. Just teasing. So I think that asks you really to reflect and pray about what are my most important priorities, and how do I make peace with the limitations within my role, within my department. So there's a readjustment, I would say, that needs to happen in order for you to avoid burnout. And ultimately that points to how can I trust the Lord more with my expectations, my aspirations? And then another option is how do I consult with my boss above me as far as delegation, prioritizing, things of that nature, so that you're not pushing your people into burnout.
Can I jump in here? I wanted to make an additional comment, Natalie, to what you said. And I think I think sometimes people get fixated on knowing who's telling the truth and who isn't. Some situations you're really never going to know for sure. And to be blunt, you don't have to be right. You have to have gone through a reasonable process and had and done the best you can to assess the information in front of you. You could end up being wrong. It's hard. It's hard to know, particularly in these cases with issues of harassment, discrimination, and a lot of this stuff you're never really going to know for sure. But the law doesn't require that you be correct in every aspect of it. But it does require that you approach it in the way that Natalie suggested.
Thank you both. Ruben, can you expand on the do's and don'ts of using AI in the workplace?
Well, I have an expert right next to me here that's going to be presenting. Join us in Miami, and you'll know. No, I think, AI is very powerful, and it can be very useful. In the workplace, like we talked in our session, you can use AI on the HR side, right? And then you can use AI on the employment side when you're performing your duties. So I think if you're using AI as an employee for all your work product, and your employer doesn't know, and you're passing it as your own, and you're hired in a position where you're hired because you were for your skill of producing work product, and I think that's a problem. But I think there's a place for AI in the workplace. And then on the HR side, I think again, if you're asking AI to create a list of questions for you, or to write a job description, and that comes out to be very discriminatory against somebody that has a disability, or a particular race, or a particular age, for example, the liability is going to come back to you, not to your AI vendor. In addition to, you will be also responsible. But I think that's why you should have a policy on AI and so that people know what's okay to do and what's not okay to do, because it's going to vary so much. When you talk about do's and don'ts, it's just going to vary so much position by position. So it's really hard for me to tell you, you can do this and not that, because that may be okay in one position, but not in another. Bob, feel free to.
No, that about covers it.
So, Mr. Bob, your voice is quite powerful and calm in the back, so we're pushing it closer so you can pick up clearly in the mic.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, so we really want diversity. So guide us. What's the best practice to ensure that I have meaningful diversity in my team? Meaningful diversity in my team.
Is that for me?
Sure.
Oh, was that? You can take it. I'm
Whoever will.
super comfortable with somebody else taking it.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, no, go ahead.
Look, when I left my law firm in Baltimore, we wanted to become more diverse, both ethnically, racially, and gender-wise. It was a bunch of guys. It's not as easy as you think, because you don't control who submits resumes and who comes in for interviews. You don't control any of that, any of their characteristics, except the qualifications part, which kind of goes to what you were saying. That's what you should be evaluating on. But nonetheless, there is, I think it is important to have, age, gender, racial, and ethnic diversity, not because it's just something that you read on a fortune cookie, but because we behave differently and we learn stuff that we wouldn't otherwise know. You guys think about it. Gentlemen, I'm a gentleman, so I'm going to say it about us. When you're a bunch of guys together, you talk differently than when there are women there. Am I wrong?
It's true.
Ladies? Am I wrong about the flip side of that? So why does diversity matter? And this goes for racial and ethnic as well. Because we're imperfect, and what we need is each other to not only teach us by our words, but teach us by our actions and govern our behavior. And I think that's a big part of it. So I think for me, but it isn't as easy as just, okay, we're deciding we're going to be more diverse. We did that at my law firm, and it was hard. I called people, I said, we would like to have a more inclusive staff. We had 3 openings. All we got were white men resumes. I don't know why that was. I don't. But the point is that in spite of trying to be deliberate about it, now what our senior partner eventually did was he called in a consultant, and it helped, but it didn't solve the issue completely. Now, 15 years later, the issue is solved, but it doesn't happen like that. It's not as easy as just deciding you want to be more diverse. Anyway. That's the comments. That's based on experientially. These are my experiences. I haven't done any studies or anything like that, but these are what I've seen and experienced.
Thank you. This question is a little different. As a manager, do I need to disclose if I start dating another person in a different department?
I think that maybe Jasmine.
So the question is, as a manager, do I need to disclose if I start dating another person in a different department? Jasmine, I see some of us up here looking at you for that guidance. Tim says it will be disclosed on its own. Okay, the Saints want to hear you. I would repeat, but they want to hear you.
Speedster.
For a start, you could meet at Starbucks.
Thank you. what I was saying is we do have a policy, but it's like the nepotism policy, which is that we don't allow or recommend that relationship with supervisor and any, next to kin, spouse or fiancé or son, that direction, that relationship. However, if you're a manager in the HR department and you start dating someone in the Pathfinder department, I don't think there is any policy that prohibits from that or that asks you to disclose it. And unless there's more to this that we don't know in this question.
I wouldn't recommend the Pathfinders Department.
Thank you. Oh, Lord. Based on the current political and immigration laws, how do you advise us to deal with it? And how do we know if they have gotten a letter terminating their legal working status? I guess the they is an employee got a letter.
Is that an immigration question?
So it says, based on the current political and immigration laws, how do you advise us to deal with it? And how do we know if they, and I'm assuming the they is perhaps an employee, if an employee has gotten a letter terminating their legal working status?
In other words, withdrawing their work authorization? How would you deal with it? Well, my wife is the immigration lawyer, so she's the one that I should have, beamed her up, Scotty, and brought her down here. But here's the situation. I've faced a few of these little situations. If you have someone who you've let go from a position, you hire somebody on a religious worker visa, and they come in, and you fire the pastor. You have to let ICE, it's ICE, know that they're no longer working for you, and they have, I believe it's 60 days to either get what work authorization elsewhere or leave. So you need to have an immigration lawyer. I don't want to tell you who to use, but when I have an immigration question, I either call my wife, who is not in private practice, or I call Andrea Stewartson, which this conference uses for immigration work. So you need to call somebody who really knows what they're doing. That is not me. I've run into a few immigration issues and dealt with them through help from my friends.
All right.
No, I'm not the immigration person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it legal to favor one employee over another because one gets along better? Let me phrase it. I'm going to use myself so it reads easier. Is it legal to favor one employee over another because I get along better with that particular employee, even though the other employee is better qualified overall for the job? So, good fit for the team. I get along better with Jasmine over Conrad. Is it okay to pick, Jasmine, even though Conrad has more years of experience?
Yeah, I mean, I would consider it depends. Interpersonal skills are, and if that's a preference of the supervisor or manager, that the employee have good interpersonal skills, and this person does have better interpersonal skills, and that's important for the position, then it would be appropriate to make a decision based on that. But I would just qualify that the interpersonal skills need to be relevant for the position, because there's sometimes where you have employees that really work in isolated positions and it's not necessary for them to have good interpersonal skills. So I wouldn't be hiring somebody, it goes back to what's necessary for the job.
Thank you. I'm going to take this one because we alluded to it a little earlier. Where would one find the written organization's policy on targeting in the workplace as well as employees creating conflict? Actually, I'm going to ask you people, because I know a lot of you came to orientation. So let's see how much you actually retained from that experience. Where do you find working policy information? On your... And the church says amen. Well, there are qualifications for a position, and then there's personality. This kind of sounds similar. temperament, and maturity. Can these values be considered when hiring?
Yeah, I think you can consider anything outside a protected characteristic. So if somebody seems like a better fit because they seem to have better personal skills in a position where they're going to be interacting frequently with clients, and maybe they have a bachelor's and the other person has a master's degree, but they are just not very good with people based on an interview, then that's a legitimate reason to pick the person.
Thank you. And I want to thank this person for following through with a clarification for one of our first questions. This was the question about going back and forth in an email, should it be discussed to agree? So the clarification reads, I'm looking for advice on how to best document conversations, especially when there might be disagreement, in a way that avoids endless back and forth emails. What strategies do you find effective for summarizing discussions and ensuring mutual understanding without getting into an email argument?
Well, this happens to me with opposing counsel. So I make my point and, and made a decision on something and, they want to go back and forth and, in like an employee situation, I've already addressed it. We can just agree to disagree and I don't engage anymore. There's nothing that says, I know we all have the inclination. We get an email, we get a phone call, we get a text, we feel like we have to respond. You don't. Yeah. So I get lots of emails I just delete.
That's exactly.
So you don't have to respond to, and not my clients, but I get lots of emails from other, from people that just, vendors that want to talk to me or, same thing with your employees. Once you've said what you need to say, and they haven't provided any more information, you don't have to respond, or you could just say received, I'm not going to repeat what we've already discussed.
And that's it, the shutting it down part, which you just mentioned, is really important. And you got to do so with, civility and professionalism. But you are not obligated to answer every little sniping comment or every little, you don't have to. And sometimes, I just met you, I don't know what your practice is, but you ever get, I don't know what that said, but you get some nutty people out there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's opposing counsel, sometimes it's just, and you need to be able to shut that stuff down. In the employment context, I think you can shut it down and say, we need to have a face-to-face. These email discussions are not a conversation. It's not the same thing. Yeah. So, and although be careful what you wish for,
right.
You just might get it. So, but the shutting it down that you just mentioned, that's really important. I have a hard time with that because my defense mechanism is sarcasm. And that does not do well verbally or on email. It just doesn't work. So you figure out your own way. And
yeah.
Wait 24 hours before you respond so you're
Yeah,
not sarcastic or
I'm always sarcastic.
Unprofessional. But give it some thought if you are going to respond and you're, so you're not responding in haste or irritation or anger.
Yeah, I would say don't respond right away. And like Bob said, you got to be careful with this one, but a lot of times if I know who I'm dealing with already, I'll say, thanks, if you want to discuss further, please stop by or give me a call. A lot of times they won't because they're fixated on that back and forth and they don't really want to talk to you anymore. But it can be, like you said, it can backfire. So just kind of use it with caution.
I am careful though, because I just sent an email to opposing counsel to not say, I don't want to, if I'm going to write back, I don't want to acknowledge that I admit to whatever it is they're saying. So if you did, thanks, let's have a call. if the person's complaining, like, you don't want it to be like an admission.
Right.
Yeah, I
Right.
agree
Right,
with
if
everything
they
you've
said,
just
well,
said.
this,
Thank
you're gonna
you
pay for all
sharing.
this, I'm not gonna say, yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
you're being called, yeah.
So, I mean, I just very shortly, succinctly said, I don't agree with anything that you've said. And, we're basically at an impasse.
We're done.
And,
Yeah.
so, but, if you want to file a lawsuit, yeah, I'll accept service.
Yeah.
So we have just about 6 more minutes, and we have a few more questions. So I'm going to try to see how best to maneuver here. Talking about other jobs, what is the conference's position on serving in the military? Jasmine, if you can hold that answer. I do want us to answer that, but let's kind of go up. As a small organization and being limited to hire only Adventist employees, it's hard to fill positions in our church and school. We are often limited to hire individuals that may have other jobs. We have even asked individuals who work full-time elsewhere to take on local hire positions because they're capable. This goes against what's been suggested about side hustles and burnout. Is there a happy medium, Nick?
What? How'd that get to me?
I'm just kidding. I just wanted to pull you in there. But whoever wants to answer that. What's the happy medium on these hard-to-fill positions and small organizations where full-time employees are filling locally funded positions to help?
They are full-time employees outside of the organization?
Yeah, I don't really understand what she said.
Okay, we'll think about that. It didn't specify. It says, full-time elsewhere. Yeah, full-time elsewhere. We don't care. I'm just kidding. I don't want to answer that. Let's get the real answer. So they're full-time outside of the conference, but we bring them part-time to help. Maybe they're a teacher aide or aftercare person, but they may be a full-time teacher in a school outside of Florida Conference. What's the happy medium as we talk about side hustles and burnout?
I won't speak to burnout, but I think, what is something that interferes with the part-time position? I think you can use the same formula to sort of figure out, if I have a teacher who teaches elementary school in the public school, and he or she comes in and works 8 hours a week to do aftercare at the Seventh-day Adventist school, I'm not sure the full-time job at the public school interferes with their full commitment to 8 hours a week part-time. I just don't know. I think you have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, but at the same time, what is the commitment that's required for 2 4-hour stints to do aftercare? And I'm not belittling aftercare. I was happy we had capable people to watch my kids when they were little. But what is the commitment that's necessary? I'm pretty sure you wouldn't say that to me, to Bob, you wouldn't say, oh, you can't work any more than just the 2 8-hour or the 2 4-hour stints, because otherwise you wouldn't be committed to that. That would be ridiculous. So I think you look at what the situation is, because you've kind of flipped the coin on this question. They're not working full-time for the conference, they're working full-time. Now, the public school system may have a problem with it, don't know. And they tend to be union, and they have very definite rules in their contracts, their collective bargaining agreements. So I don't know how the public school, I don't really care what the public school people, the management would think of it. But for us, if you're hiring such a person in a part-time or a limited capacity, you just have to measure what is the need of commitment for them to do what we've asked them to do. And if they can do the full-time job and the commitment to the Seventh-day Adventist institution, again, though, as Ruben said earlier, that's for your administrators to decide.
So I can say, actually, as I think further about that, I was just surprised by the curveball, if you will. How did we get to me? The issue is, how much is their full-time job taking from them, and then what kind of capacity do they have? Some people might have plenty of capacity. I mean, I have therapists that work for me that have a full-time gig, and then they do 6 to 12 hours a week, and their full-time gig doesn't take a lot from them. They don't have a lot going on in their life outside. And so they have the bandwidth. And so it's really a question of, do they have the bandwidth? Can they honor their most important commitments and still do the work? And if that's the case, then I think it's a green light.
Thank you so much. So we're right at time. I'm going to ask this last question, and I believe, Ruben, you mentioned something about this in your presentation, so I want to pose this question to you, and I want to thank you all for all the wonderful questions that you submitted, and my apologies for not being able to get to every single one of them. What level of reference checking is done by the Florida Conference when hiring teachers from other conferences? And this is the part. Why have there been cases where the Florida Conference has hired teachers from other conferences with issues? So we do background checks, but Ruben, if you could speak specifically to one where we're now able to check cross-conference.
Oh, yeah, so we talked about not, if you're hiring someone that's already worked for the Adventist Church in the past, to not only do a criminal background check, but to do an ARN check. And it's at Adventist Screenings at arm.org. You send your request there, and if ARM has a file, they will, on that person, because either there was an allegation or an actual complaint or an investigation, then they will let you know what that is, right? Is that how it works? Yes. And I encourage you to do that. I know of situations where it hasn't been done and it hasn't turned out great. And I'm sure there's been a lot where it's avoided, taking on an employee that had a pattern or a history of something, and you being part of, giving the opportunity for that to continue.
Jasmine, may I have your permission? I really want to ask this question. Last one. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Would seeking a professional counseling arrangement for oneself be considered work hours or personal time? My understanding is it would be personal, says the question. Is that considered? So if I went to get professional counseling, is that considered work hours or personal time? Because, technically, if I'm a better me, then I'm a better employee for you. So is that personal time or work hours?
Yeah, if you're, so there are times when the employer can direct an employee. You can do like a mandatory EAP referral, and if we're requiring the person to go and show up for an appointment, then the employer would pay for that time. But if you're voluntarily seeking counseling, training, further education, that's not considered to be hours of work that that the employer would be obligated to pay.
Thank you so much. Have you learned something new today? Can we thank our presenters? Thank you so much for your time and for your sacrifice and for sharing your knowledge with us. And we now turn over to Jasmine and Linda.
Give them another round of applause. If it wasn't for them, we didn't have this amazing summit.
Thank you.
And Mr. President.
Thanks, man.
Oh, you're with Ron in there?
I wanted to say thank you to all of you on the platform. Nick, thank you. Your presentations, they were amazing. I learned so much. So, and I also want to say thank you because on one way or another, you're also engaged with the church, supporting the church. HR department, Bob with our claims and risk management, and Nick with coaching and helping us find balance in our lives. So thank you so much. Thank you so much. I learned so much. I learned, Bob, that I cannot continue selling glasses anymore. Well, for the record, I sold my last pair of glasses 25 years ago. And I saw my last patient 25 years ago when I was invited to serve the church as a full-time pastor. So, yes, I fixed the glasses for my brothers and sisters in the office. They come to me and they said, Alan, the glasses are falling, can you fix them? And I do it for free. So I don't have a side job, Bob, I don't. Thank you for coming, and yes, we learned so much. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming. This is amazing. We do it every year. I want to thank Advent Health for their support and for your also presence and participation. Joy, thank you, Pastor. Amazing devotional this morning. Thank you so much. And there's so much to learn. I was sitting in there and I had a bright idea. How about if we have all these experts to come with me to churches on Sabbath? As I do town halls after lunch, and I answer the theological questions, and then you answer all the other questions. It will be so much easier for me. Because the truth is that I find myself not finding answers to many questions that come our way in today's world. And the more I think about the answers, the more I believe if I answered that question, I'm going to get myself in trouble. Difficult questions. So I would love to have you all with me when I visit our churches on Sabbath and I preach and I stay for lunch, and then I have the brothers and sisters come for a town hall, and they ask questions about everything: budget, human resources, ministries, departments, deportation, immigration. Schools, situations in our universities or high schools. It is a complicated world. And it is going to get more complicated as we approach the second coming of Jesus. That's what the Bible says. And that is what we preach as a church. But praise the Lord. It doesn't matter because we're not afraid. Jesus is coming soon. And in the new kingdom, we're not going to have an HR department. And we're not going to need a coach, a psychologist, my psychologist for many years. And we're not going to necessarily need Bob to help us with our claims and all of that. It will be a beautiful place. Are you praying that Jesus comes soon? Are you praying that is? So let us continue serving the Lord, and let us try to do it better every day as we learn to maneuver through new things that come at us. I remember the first HR summit happened, how many years ago, Jasmine? 3-4 years ago? And the topics, they keep evolving, they keep changing. And I want to say that the topics that we cover today pretty much cover everything from self-care to HR questions to managing liability and exposure and all of that. Especially as pastors, we need to commit to what we do. I get that question all the time. Can I get into the business? And I say, no, I think you should dedicate yourself to the ministry full time. Yeah. So this is our commitment to the Lord. This is what we offer the Lord and His church. And this is what the Lord has called us to do, right? So God bless you. I pray that you learned a lot today, that it was a blessing for you. I pray that all the presentations and everything that was put together for you was of beneficial for you, right? And finally, I want to say thank you to Jasmine and her team. Let us acknowledge Jasmine and Renee and Linda, and I saw Melita this morning, and of course, the Office of Secretariat. They are the ones who keep us moving forward, doing the right thing. They're the ones helping us with the operations of the church. And of course, the Healing Ministry of Christ, who is here too. Thank you for your support. Without you, we would not be able to do what we do. Because yes, we proclaim the second coming of Jesus. We preach the Bible, we teach the Bible, but there comes a point when we are talking about operations and doing the right things, right? So you are the platform on which we stand every Sabbath, and we do ministry, and we open the Word and preach the gospel. Thank you so much. Thank you.